that you lost yourself and all that you know. When your lights are almost out, just remind yourself that you're not alone. We will find you, it's deep in your bones. You can hide it, you're one of us. Don't deny it, you're one of us. We are the chosen generation, the kings and queens who rule the streets. We are the revolution, breaking through the concrete. We are the revolution, breaking through the concrete. Have you ever felt that way? When there's no backing down or getting away? When you have to make a stand and remind yourself that you're not alone. We will find you, it's deep in your bones. You can hide it, you're one of us. Don't deny it, you're one of us. We are the chosen generation, the kings and queens who rule the streets. We are the revolution, breaking through the concrete. We are the chosen generation, the kings and queens who rule the streets. We are the revolution, breaking through the concrete. We are the chosen generation, the kings and queens who rule the streets. We are the revolution, breaking through the concrete. The kings and queens who rule the streets. Breaking through the concrete.
All right, good morning, everybody. I got a lot of emails over the weekend, and I guess there was a lot of confusion about it. Get onto Power School. I know it sounds really stupid, but I get a lot of emails with like, where are these assignments at? Where is this located at? How do I do this? Power School. Get onto Power School. It has all the answers that you need for everything. There's nothing hidden. Everything is out there. So if you have any questions or concerns or anything like that about what we're doing, what we're going over, anything like that, get onto Power School and check. All right, that is your number one resource for everything that we're doing. That's where I post all the assignments at. Well, how do I send the assignments? However you want. You can take a picture of it, send it to me that way. You can copy and paste it. If you don't have a copy of Word, what you do is you download it and then upload it to your Office 365 account. And I do want to kind of emphasize this. Use your FWCS email address. All right. I know it sounds really stupid, but if you have a ridiculous email address, and I'm not going to call anyone out, but I've seen some pretty stupid email addresses. A lot of times those will end up in my junk mailbox. All right. And it's best to get used to, composing emails, writing emails, and having an email address that is representative of you as a professional rather than just some email address that you made when you were 8 years old and you're still somehow using it. I have an email address that I made when I was, oh my God, I was maybe a sophomore, maybe a freshman in high school, something like that. And I don't really use that for much. I use that to sign up for accounts that I know that they're going to send me spam emails and things like that. So that's okay to have an account like that, but you do, when you're emailing teachers and other people, you need to have some air of professionalism behind you. So make sure that you're using your school email address. It's very simple, first name, period, last name at FWCS students. So it makes it super clean and easy to use. Okay, so today we're going to talk about alleles. All right. So we had covered alleles before, and basically all that alleles are is, if I was saying I have a red flower, all right, this is a red flower, all right. So here's a red flower, and that is homozygous dominant. This is an allele, and this is an allele. All right. So there are two combinations that you can have for allele, or two alleles that you can have. You can have dominant and recessive. There are more than this, but these are the only two that we're going to be talking about when it comes to this, because we saw with blood type about how there are different combinations, and there's also where you can have 3-letter combinations for it that are determined by different things. So what does this have to do with evolution at all? Well, remember that evolution acts on the phenotype, the physical expression. All right, the physical expression of different things. So, kind of going back to our window, or our one of our pictures. Where's my example at? I know it's in here. This example right here. Going back to this example, looking at this, you could see that you have your black mice and your tan mice. The tan mice stand out among the rock, and therefore the bird will it has an easier time seeing those and can consume them, and that causes a change. All right, so we're acting against the phenotype here. All right, so you have the black colored ones and then the tan colored ones, and then over time you end up with more black mice than tan mice. So let's think about this from a standpoint when we were talking about how you have let's say black mice and tan mice. All right, so when looking at this, if you have a lot of individuals that have this and a lot that have this, and let's say it's a perfect 50-50 split, these are going to be selected against. But does tan still exist in the population? And the answer is yes, it exists right here. All right, tan exists right there, which means that if, let's say, all of these die, all right, let's say not even going back to that example of where some of them made it. Let's go to this one where none make it. Then you'll end up with a Punnett square that looks like this. All right. I'm not going to fill it in because I suck at writing on this. But as you fill this in, you could see that in this column, you're going to have this tan allele that survives. All right. So even though that we've selected against the phenotype, underlying we need to look at the genotype. Now we've selected against this genotype. All right. And back when Darwin and Mendel were close to the same time, right? Mendel did a lot of his stuff after Darwin, but there's some possibility, or there's a lot of stories about whether Mendel actually saw any of Darwin's work So Mendel was the monk who is kind of the father of modern day genetics, and Darwin the father of evolution. And so they didn't have any evidence of all of this happening. So Darwin thought that it was blended, right? So if you have, let's say you have one parent that is this, and then one parent that is this, then you will end up as this. All right. And he didn't associate letters with it. He just thought that these phenotypes were blended together. All right. So if you had a tall parent and a short parent, rather than dividing up these alleles, how we know through independent assortment, Darwin thought that they were blended, but that was common at the time. That was the common mode of thinking. Like everyone kind of thought that way. And so over time, as we got more information, all of this changed. And so as you can see, we said that if you have these genotypes, right, and they're expressed as phenotypes, what you end up with is what's called population genetics. Why do we call it population? Well, in the example of the mice, those black mice were on black rock. But what if the tan mice were on tan rocks in a separate population? Well, then the genetics of that population would be separate. And sometimes you hear people kind of discuss this as more of the microevolution side of it. And the reason that they discuss it that way is because you're dealing with evolution. I had to get my spelling out. That's a no. Because you're dealing with how these change over a shorter period of time due to some influence. All right. So remember, going back to a definition, our definitions, what is a population? A population is the same species. All right. Right now, the census is currently going on to a limited extent. But with the census, they care about population. When they ask you how many people live in your household, they're concerned with how many people. They're not concerned with how many people and pets. Like they don't care that you have a dog, a cat, and a bird. They're more concerned with, there are 2 adults and 2 children living in this house. And so that's what they're trying to get their numbers for. So basically think of alleles in this situation as genes, and they will influence what your population looks like. And again, why are we concerned with population? Why are we not concerned with the community? The reason that we're concerned with the population is because they have to be able to share these genetics. Evolution does you no good if you cannot pass down your traits to the next generation, which means that if there is a species that will, so for example, a mule, right, which is a combination of a horse and a donkey. In that situation, with the combination of a horse and a donkey, that is not considered to be evolution because those traits can be passed down, but they can't be passed down from there. So there is a stopping point because of that same species barrier. All right. So to kind of re-emphasize, remember, capital letters represent dominant, lowercase letters represent recessive. Dominant doesn't mean better. Dominant means that it will mask or hide a recessive allele in a complete dominant situation. All right. And that's what we're going to be talking about, is a complete dominant situation. So the example that I have in order to talk about alleles is flowers. I'm a botanist, so we're going to go with flowers. So in this situation, don't ever use W. All right. Don't use letters that look the same when they're capital and lowercase. The person that made this graphic was smart enough to make sure that they wrote it in different colors. So capital W in purple, lowercase w in gray. But try to avoid using letters that look the same, capital and lowercase. W's, M's, things like that. I's. Try to use, and like I said, if you don't know what letter to go to, use just use A, since capital and lowercase a look different from each other. Okay, so looking at this, you can see, I want to copy this image and then put it into a new paint because I want to draw on it. Okay, it did not copy. Copy. Paste. There we go. Okay. And then let me adjust the size of it really quick. That did not work out the way I wanted it to. Okay, we're just gonna leave it like this. Improvise. Okay, looking at this, how many alleles are in this population if this is the 3 flowers? So going back to the question, it's, okay. Going back to this question, it is, how many alleles are here? Now, it would be easy to say, well, that's easy. 1, 2, and 3. But it's not. It is 2, 4, and 6. So there are a total of 6 alleles. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right. Now there are 3 individuals, and there are going to be 2 phenotypes in this, and then 3 genotypes. But in this situation, there are 6 alleles, and that's important. All right. So when we look at this, we can ask a question. What is the distribution of alleles? So with that, you're looking at how many dominant and how many recessive. So if you look at that, it is 3 out of 6, and it is 3 out of 6, which means that each of them are 50%. All right, each of them are at 50%. Now, usually what we do to make this easier, because we're going to be doing everyone's favorite thing later, and that's math, is that we actually convert this to 0.5. All right, so make sure that you convert this to 0.5. Why are we converting it to 0.5? Well, because 1 equals 100%. So if I say I have an allelic distribution of 1, that means that that is the only allele that dominates that ecosystem. All right. So this tells us the allelic frequency. All right. The number of alleles that are in that population divided by the total number of alleles in the population for that one trait. All right. Which means that if I say how, let's say I completely eliminate this plant. I'm actually going to switch to another color. Let's do gray. I'm going to eliminate this plant right here. So it's gone. What is your allelic distribution now? Well, you have 4 with 3 purple alleles, 1 recessive allele, which means that you have, for A, is 3 out of 4, which is 0.75. And then for your recessive allele, that is 1 out of 4, 4.25. But every individual in this population is still purple. It's just you have this one heterozygous individual that is carrying this allele. So why does this matter? How does this at all pertain to evolution? We've already done genetics. All right, so how does this actually pertain to evolution? Let's go back to the mice situation. All right, let's go back to the mice. So you have 3 mice, little feet. Three mice. All right. So within this, these three mice, you have an equal variation within it. We know that a bird comes along. Bird. Okay, I know that this is like the worst bird. This bird comes along and takes care of this guy. All right, so this one's gone, which means that these genes have been eliminated. So if these are the only two individuals left, that means that your frequency has changed from 0.5 and 0.5, and they've now shifted due to predation to 0.75, 0.25. So you've now completely shifted all of this. So going to a second example, here's a full population of peas. All right, let me copy this again. This is, hopefully this does not end poorly like before. Okay, that actually went well. So here's your population of pea plants that you have. All right, so you have mostly in this population, it is purple. You have 9 total, and then because of that, you now have these 2 white plants. So to make it really fast, how many alleles are present? Well, you have 9 plants times 2, and that gives you a grand total of 18 alleles. So you have 18 alleles total in this population. All right. Now, how many do we have of each? So 2. So the easiest way to do this is just to write next to it how many dominant alleles you have. 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, and 2. So and then when we add these up, you have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13. So you have 13 that are dominant. So how do we find out how many are recessive? Well, you do 18 minus 13, and then that will give you 5 that are recessive. I know I switched to B, but that's because it's easy to tell. So you've changed the number. You've changed the number of alleles that you have in your population. Hold on, I'm getting an error on my stream. It says that my audio bitrate is set to 0. My audio bitrate is set to 320. So it is Spotify quality, where it should be. Okay. So you guys can hear me, right? Hopefully you guys can. So right here you have your the number of your number of alleles in each. So how do we find the allelic distribution? Well, we do simple math. 13 divided by 18 and 5 divided by 18. That gives you, if you want to, and you're watching this later, you can pause or you could do the math really quick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a sip of water, and then I will let you guys get the answer to that, and then I'll give you the answer once we're done. Okay, I'm sure that was like Dora the Explorer, and everybody just sat there in awkward silence, waiting for me to give the answer. So, all right. So looking at this, you have 0.72, the terrible 2, and then 0.28. All right. How can you check your work? Add these up. Should equal 1. All right. It should add up to 100%. All right. So we could do the same thing for the phenotype. All right. So we have total of, for phenotype, we have 9 phenotypes. All right. We have for purple, we have 7. And for white, we have 2. And you could divide those by 9. When you divide those by 9, you have 0.78 and 0.22. All right, so those are your distributions for your phenotype. Notice they're pretty close to the genotype, not exactly, and you'll rarely ever get, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're, that should be the result that you get. And so, how can this relate back to what we're doing with evolution? Okay, so here we have this population, and the math has been done for us that we got before, the 0.72 for the number of dominant alleles, and 0.28 for the number of recessive alleles. And remember, that is alleles, not plants. So this plant, the one at the top middle, contains both a dominant and a recessive allele. So as plants die off and they grow up, and the offspring grow up, you end up with this new generation, exactly 9 plants. But notice how now you have 3 that you could consider to be purebreds because they contain both dominant alleles. You have 4 that are purebred to have recessive alleles, and 2 that are heterozygous because they contain both a dominant and a recessive allele. Now notice how in this situation, there's been a push toward 50-50 with this. Why would there be a push toward 50-50? Well, this assumes that we're going to be doing random mating and random population. All right, so there's random mating with random population. And this leads kind of into the last point where we talk about gene pool. Let me pull up a new paint. So in this, we're talking about, we'll do blue. Talking about gene pool. All right. So the gene pool is this right here. The total number of every type of allele that's present within that population that stands a chance for mating or that will mate. All right. So these are, so gene pool is all alleles in a population. Now I know that there's that this can be expanded to within the entire species, but we're clumping this up to represent a population because that's what we're looking at. Think back to the mice example. What if there are mice that live in sand rather than, like, let's say that's volcanic rock, right? Volcanic rock is very dark in color, but what happens if there's a separate population of the same mice that they live on sandy soils? Then instantly the white one or the tan ones are going to be at an advantage because they're going to blend into the environment compared to the black ones that blend in more to the lava stone or the volcanic rock. So the reason that you think of this as a gene pool is because if you are taking, let's say in that original mouse population, here's one person, or here's one mouse, here's a second mouse, here's a third mouse, here's a fourth one, a fifth one, and let's add on a 6th one. What you are doing is you are saying in this that you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dominant alleles and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 recessive alleles. This is your total pool of which you can draw numbers out of. All right, this is your total pool in which you can draw numbers out of. And to come up with your distributions, again, it is your frequency is, so it is frequency of blank allele. All right. So in this, you can either insert dominant or recessive. All right. So let's do dominant is number of dominant divided by total. All right. And then if we want to, for other one, it is your total of your recessive allele divided, or the number of your recessive allele divided by total. And remember that these two numbers should add up to equal 1. All right. If you guys have any questions as I'm going along, type them into chat. All right. So I think that this is, it's pretty straightforward. All right. This is taking some concepts in math and moving those over to represent a concept in biology. And we do this for certain specific things because, again, just like how I brought up in class that that there's a species of rhino in which every single individual is, or there's only 2 individuals left and they're both female. All right. Well, okay, what does that represent? Well, it represents that that species is going extinct because instantly, if you have these are your last 3 individuals, right? And this is Sudan, which was the last living male. And if all of a sudden Sudan dies, that means that he took the male allele with him when he died, which means that that allele is considered to be extinct. All that's left are those X alleles. Now, this is a situation involving rhinos, not humans, but I'm using it as a human representation here. Because not only is he taking that male allele with him, or the male genes with him, he's taking all the other genes that are within his population. So that leads into this next point called genetic diversity. All right, so we'll talk about genetic diversity. And we'll talk a little bit more about this on Wednesday. All right. That is a terrible T. Genetic diversity. All right. So genetic diversity is just that. What range of these genes do you have? And the reason that we bring that up is because alleles can go extinct. All right, alleles can go extinct. So what does that actually mean? In this situation, this allele is gone. It's extinct. It no longer exists, and it's out of this population. Now, this is an extreme case. All right, so let's bring up the instance of the mice. All right. What happens as this population is reduced? Does it cause extinction of the tan alleles? Let's say in this one, every single tan mouse was gone. All that's left are black mice. Is the tan allele extinct? Well, no. The reason it's not extinct is because some of these, if black is a dominant allele, it might be heterozygous. And because of that, it will still exist within this within this population. Looking at mosquitoes, does the resistant allele still survive in the population? Well, maybe. If the resistance is, or the non-resistance alleles are recessive and the resistance ones are dominant, then yes, those alleles can still survive in the population. All right. So that is where all of these kind of play into, is when you look at, are these alleles actually extinct? Because in this situation, let's say we get rid of the one gray one in the population. Well, all you've done is you've reduced this number down now to 3, because you have the 3 that exist in these heterozygous individuals. All right. So now you've changed the number. So you've changed the distribution, but it's not extinct. If these two individuals mate, looking at your Punnett square, then you will end up with a tan individual. So that still exists within the population. All right, you still have those in the population. So those alleles did not go extinct, but they can. And we'll talk about that on Wednesday, because a lot of this, I'm gonna turn my light on so that it's not completely blank. Okay, so why do we talk about allele distribution? When we talk about conservation, when we talk about preservation, when we talk about any of that stuff, what we're doing is we are focusing a lot on the genetics. If let's say randomly organisms die off, some alleles are still going to exist. But if they're selectively targeted, like in the example of the mice or in the example of the mosquitoes, if they're selectively targeted, then that will start to eliminate alleles and change those frequencies. But that is a big thing that now we're starting to talk a little bit about, is genetic diversity. Like, what is genetic diversity? What should we save? What should be let go? How much genetic diversity is preserved within the population? So the example of the mice, if it is the heterozygous and dominant individuals that are surviving, then that means some of those genes are surviving within the population, which means what happens if, let's say, over time, that volcanic rock starts to mature and gains more of a tan color to it. Well, that tan allele still exists within the population in order to redistribute out there. And so a lot of these, when we talk about conservation and we think about conservation, this is a big thing that we really care about. You know, it's like the Noah's Ark thing. If you only have 2 of each individual, a male and a female, how much genetic diversity actually exists within that? Compare that to if you took 100, 50 males, 50 females, and they were selected completely at random, you now have a wider range of genetic diversity. What if you took 1,000 or 10,000? So this is where genetic diversity kind of plays in. And we can use this to measure evolution over time, which we'll get to a little bit later. We're not going to talk about it this week. We will a little bit once we go through Hardy-Weinberg, which is, no one has fun doing Hardy-Weinberg. I don't even think Hardy-Weinberg had fun doing Hardy-Weinberg, and they were the ones that came up with it. But we'll talk about how this is actually used by evolutionary ecologists on Wednesday when we talk about Hardy-Weinberg. A really good friend of mine is an evolutionary biologist. She did research with minnows and creek chub, and so she has a lot of data over that. And so that's where I know a lot of my stuff from is or as far as what evolutionary biologists do, is watching her kind of do most of her research and things like that. It's really interesting to see it happen, because it's evolutionary biology is kind of that cross point. I'm a field ecologist. I work outside. I don't do a whole lot of work in a lab, while with evolutionary ecologists, they do kind of 50-50. They go out there and they collect the data and they're doing all this stuff out in the field, and then they come in and they do the genetic component in a lab. So they are kind of this merger of, you know, the pure lab people and the pure field people. I'm mostly a field person. I do a lot of research outside. But that is all I have for today. So that's 40 minutes. That's not too bad. I will begin posting more assignments. Remember, get onto PowerSchool and check assignments. If you're asking where can I find this assignment at and you haven't looked on PowerSchool, then you need to check PowerSchool. Make sure that you're using your FWCS email account. Don't be sending me an email. Don't be sending me an email with some ridiculous thing, because it'll end up in my junk box, and I don't always go and check my junk box. I only check it if I see that that it's like once it gets to access, because it does take up space in my inbox. I've been getting a lot of emails from other teachers about how I do all of this. I will do a video going over that, but it'll be completely separate. It'll be outside of kind of the normal school hours, since I'm busy doing grades and things like that. Again, if you have emails or if you have questions, send me an email. Post comments on this. If you you know, type it during the live chat, because I can see the chat right now. There's nothing in it, but I can answer questions if they're posted into there. If you post a comment on the video, I do go back and I read them. The only one that's commenting on them right now is some bot that's trying to sell me a boost service. But that is pretty much all I have. End screen. We'll be moving over to Google Meets. The other thing, if you come into Google Meets, type your actual name in. Don't type in a ridiculous username, because if you're not using your FWCS account, I'm going to click deny when it comes to accepting you into the group chat. All right. So make sure that you're actually typing in your real name so that I can see who it is. But that is everything that I have for today. If you have any questions, send me an email. Check PowerSchool after this for the link to get into Google Meets. I'm going to run and use the bathroom, and then I will be straight into Google Meets. But that's all I have for today. Have a great Monday.